management and technical support for engineering projects, with more than 23 years experience in civil and environmental engineering. He's the lead engineer and project manager on the project team, doing customer interfacing, coordination of resources, and overseeing projects. And Chip has a degree from UWM as a civil engineer.
Oh, sound important. Well, I'm going to talk a little bit about stormwater pollution prevention plans, or SWIPs for short. Stormwater pollution prevention plans are plans that are developed and implemented to minimize pollutant loading from stormwater runoff from facilities. Typically facilities such as industrial sites, outside storage yards, scrap yards, Department of Public Work yards. And again, they're implemented to reduce pollutant loading in stormwater runoff or non-point source pollution, which is one of the major contributing factors of the degradation of surface waters throughout the country, as opposed to a point source, which is something that's coming out of a pipe or a very specific area. Non-point is more general runoff. Okay, so a good idea potentially for a project for the kids would be to develop a SWIP for a facility in their community. Maybe it's their schoolyard. Maybe it's their Department of Public Work yards. So I'm just going to talk a little about how we go about developing these. And the first few slides I'm going to go through here pretty quickly. You know, stormwater runoff has a variety of pollutants associated with it, as Belle talked during the introduction. There's BOD, biological oxygen demand. That's basically a measurement of organic material in the stormwater runoff that consumes oxygen and degrades the water quality. TSS is total suspended solids. That's your sediment and your silt that's in your runoff. Runoff can have certain chemicals that can affect the pH. There's ammonia, metals, priority pollutants, organics, pesticides, whole list of things that can be in non-point source runoff. Again, most states have identified stormwater as one of the leading causes of impairments to surface waters. There's also illicit connection. Poor outdoor practices are a major urban problem, and that's sort of what the SWIPs deal with, is how you're managing your outdoor activities in your storage yard or your industrial yard to minimize those pollutants. There are a myriad of regulations that stormwater is regulated under, both at the EPA level, the federal level, state level through the DNR, and then there's also municipal regulations too. Stormwater pollution prevention, they are required for industrial facilities, scrap yards, DPW operations, marinas, but those are regulatory requirements. But again, there's no reason why a SWIP couldn't be prepared for someone's school, a schoolyard or something. The steps in developing a stormwater pollution prevention plan is you first have to identify your pollution prevention team. At your facility, you need to identify who's going to be responsible at the facility for implementing these measures and for making sure that these measures are maintained. And then you need to evaluate your facility operations. What sort of activities are you doing outside in your yard? What sort of things are you storing in your yard? A lot of DPW facilities have big salt piles that are outside, or mulch piles. You know, what sort of activities and what sort of operations do you have going on in your yard? And from that, you identify the potential sources of stormwater contamination. Again, it could be a salt pile, it could be a recycling bin, it could be a trash lugger that leaks. From there, you take a look at the site, and then you prepare a drainage map. Where does your surface runoff go to? You sort of develop basins for your yard. This area drains this direction, this area drains this direction, so you sort of have to take a look at the drainage patterns in your yard, and then prepare a site drainage map based on that. It can be a fairly generalized site drainage map. And then based on what you have, what sort of operations you have in your yard, and the drainage patterns that you've established, then you start looking at best management practices, or BMPs, to address the stormwater and to minimize the pollutant loading in that stormwater before it's discharged from your site. And facilities that are required by regulation to have these stormwater pollution prevention plans, they actually need to update them as needed and review them at least annually to make sure that they're still applicable. So, again, you're going to have to take a look at what sort of activities are taking place in your yard. What sort of things are being stored out there? What are potential sources of pollutants? Transformers have oil in them, so transformers leak sometimes. That could be a potential source of pollutants in your stormwater runoff. Cooling towers, waste dumpsters and luggers, bulk storage, and again that gets like storage of salt, storage of compost, wood chips, that type of thing. You look at your loading and unloading areas. A lot of industrial facilities have loading docks where they're loading and unloading chemicals, where if there was a spill outside, those chemicals can get washed away in the stormwater runoff. So you need to take a look at your loading and loading operations, make sure you've got proper practices and containment structures in place to make sure that if there were a spill, that there would not be transfer of that material into the runoff. Same with material transfer activities, manufacturing activities. One thing that you have to deal with, especially in urban areas, is a lot of sites are contaminated formerly from petroleum, all sorts of stuff. That can end up in your stormwater runoff. We've talked about salt storage, solid waste handling. These are all things that you need to take a look at on your facility. Do you have them on your site? If so, how are you managing stormwater runoff from those facilities or those operations to minimize the stormwater loading? Here's just some pictures. These are actually pictures from a county Department of Public Works yard. You have, this is a bulk storage bin here. I don't know exactly what this area was storing, but you see here there's a material handling chute here, some type of conveyor belt. You can see right here that you have some drainage going right in front of that area. So depending on what that was storing, you have potential for those pollutants to get right into your drainage area here. Here's another good example. It's hard to tell what that is, but it looks like maybe it's compost or something. And again, that all washes away with your stormwater runoff, and eventually that ends up in the surface water. You've got a fueling facility here at the DPW yard where there's going to be spillage of gasoline occasionally. That's going to happen, and those get washed away with the runoff. So these are the type of areas you need to take a look at, and then develop best management practices to address runoff from these areas. So after you've sort of done an inventory of your yard and the different activities that you have going in your yard and the different storage, things that you're storing in your yard, the next step would be to develop a drainage plan, if you will, or a drainage map. This is again another DPW yard, and we've divided it into different drainage areas. This area in yellow is all one drainage area. The area in red is all one drainage area. It drains off into a different direction. And then we've got a parking lot up on the upper end there that drains separately from these other areas. And in each one of these areas, we've identified potential sources of pollutants. Down in the yellow here, we've got refuse containers, your garbage containers. We've got storage tanks, underground fuel storage tanks. What else we have here? It's hard to read, but up here we've got oil storage. There's engine oil storage here, waste oil storage. We also have another dumpster up here. So again, those are all sources of pollutants. So once you've sort of developed your drainage maps, developed this and identified your sources, then you can start evaluating different techniques or best management practices to address those areas. Some of the best management practices are, minimizing outdoor storage. Maybe you don't need to store that salt outside. Maybe there's area inside your warehouse or something where you can store that. Or if you can't do that, maybe put a canopy over that storage area so you protect it from the rain and precipitation, and you don't get direct runoff from those storage piles. Spill exposure and prevention. If you're going to be handling chemicals outside, you should have spill response kits where if you did happen to have an accidental spill, you've got materials right there on hand where you can clean it up immediately before it becomes spreads out and becomes a bigger problem. You need to conduct periodic inspections of your facility. Make sure that your best management practices are being maintained, and that your good housekeeping is key in this, really. It goes right along with preventive maintenance. If you can prevent a problem from developing to begin with, it's much easier to do that than trying to deal with it after it's already a problem. So good housekeeping is a very important part of any stormwater pollution prevention plan. So I think it would be a great idea, for kids to identify a facility in their neighborhood, in their community, where they could develop a stormwater pollution prevention plan. That's it.
In his school.
At school, absolutely. A parking lot. Any questions?